So risk assessment is really important when we're kayaking. Here on this beach 3 years ago, we made probably one of our biggest mistakes in risk assessment. Me and a friend went to head out paddling behind us, and we ended up in some quite serious difficulty. A snowstorm came from over the right hand side over my shoulder, and we got caught up in some really big swell. Risk assessment is important, and in this video we're going to talk about how to risk assess safely for your own paddling skill. Let me show you where we went wrong. So on to us then. Well, we were paddling out here over my right hand shoulder and we got caught in some quite big weather. It was flat, much like today. The swell was a little bit bumpy rolling in off the reef, but the water was calm. Now obviously it was high tide, we're here at low tide today. And yeah, so we went out and we started paddling, and the weather was quite nice, quite warm, a few rollers as we hit the reef, and as we started to head out, the swell was picking up a little bit. Nothing we couldn't handle. We got about 1 kilometre offshore when we could see a storm moving in from Anstruther over on the right here. The storm was grey, black clouds, and it looked like it was snowing. But we ignored it, we didn't discuss it. As we started to round the point on my right, which will be out of shot, we realised that we were in trouble and we started to turn to come back in. The storm was moving faster than we were, and about half a kilometre off the beach, it hit us. Big waves, freezing cold hands. My GoPro was so cold that it stopped working, so I don't have any footage of that event. We managed to get back on shore, but the swell tipped us out, both out of our kayaks, and we ended up sitting in my van, both shivering to try and warm up. When we capsized, I lost my glasses and I lost my water bottle. Okay, not a massive disaster, but definitely 300-pound specs, not the thing to lose. So how could we have better prepared for that event? Well, we could have used our eyes and looked out and seen the storm coming, and perhaps turned around a little earlier.
And Alex, you probably shouldn't have even been out in those conditions. Now, I don't think I would even launch in that.
We're going to talk about how I risk assess and how we make sure it's safe when we get back to the house. Thank you for watching.
We're back here at the house, and I think it's important to share that story because it demonstrates that we all make mistakes. We all go out in conditions that are a little bit too big, and sometimes we turn around, and sometimes we turn around a little bit too late. Every mistake is a learning opportunity. When I think about whether it's safe for me to go kayaking, I always start with the weather. Wind, swell, and tides. They're the three things that I really need to consider. So for me, wind, I don't tend to kayak in anything more than about 10 knots. I do sometimes, depending on the wind direction, depending on if I can find somewhere that's a bit more sheltered, but I find that a high wind increases the drift, and actually the fishing tends not to be very good and the conditions tend not to be very good. So wind is really, really important. Wind direction as well. If it's blowing westerly or southerly, it tends to be quite sheltered and the sea tends to have a generally flatter state. If it's a bigger wind and it's coming easterly or northeasterly, at that point we in Dunbar are going to get quite a bit of swell.
Oh, that wave came into the kayak. That's my rules. As soon as waves start breaking into the kayak, that's my rule for going in. Let's just paddle in where it's a bit more sheltered, I think, because that is a pretty strong wind. If my underside gets turned to that wind, it's going to blow us over, and given this swell, that might just happen. This is definitely choppier than it was forecast. Yeah, the smokestack's pretty bent over. This is going to be an aborted kayak. Abort mission. Abort mission. Oh wow, big shelf here, better pull up those lines, that's going to snag. And dealing with a snag in this kind of weather is not my idea of fun. It's supposed to be July. In fact, it's nearly August. It's August next week. What is going on?
The forecast was for maybe a 5 or 6 knot wind, but because of the wind direction, it had created quite a lot of swell. So for me, wind is really important. The next thing to think about is the tide and the tide state. On spring tides, we've got a lot of water moving over the same period of time as we do on a neap tide where we have a lot less water. That can create eddies, currents and swells that aren't normally there. So that's where it's really important to know where you're paddling. The swell state for me, anything that's a big roller is fine, but as soon as we start to chop up, that's where I start to get uncomfortable. So for me, the first thing I think about is the weather.
I think it was a good call to leave when we have, because the wind is going to keep picking up, the tide is going to turn, and wind against tide in this weather, I don't fancy it. Also, the fog's really come in. Jesus. Yeah, wind against tide in this weather, I really don't fancy it.
The next thing for me is fatigue. How tired I am, how do I feel, how comfortable am I? Conditions that I may be comfortable in one day, I could potentially be uncomfortable the next, and that's purely down to how much I've slept, how much exercise I've done, and perhaps what I've eaten and drunk over the day. This morning, hopefully I don't look too tired, because this morning I was up at 4 o'clock and I was fishing the beaches and some rock marks here in East Lothian. Why didn't I go out on the kayak? It was glassy, it was a gorgeous morning. And the reason I didn't go out on the kayak was because I've had 5 or 6 days solid exercise between freediving, fishing, kayaking and cycling. I knew this morning I needed to let my muscles rest, and a big kayak was not going to be very comfortable. So instead I went shore fishing. Yeah, I've missed a good morning out on the water, but at the same time I wouldn't have paddled that long because I am generally quite muscularly sore. So it's really important to consider what your body is up to when you think about going kayak fishing. Then we think about how much food and drink we need to take. Always take water with you. It's really, really important. I am terrible for not taking water with me. It's really important to take at least a bottle of water with you when you're out on the water. Food, well, that depends. Do you need a snack bar or do you need a full meal? That's going to be dependent on how far you're paddling and how far you're going out for. Always carry some sort of food with you is a general rule. The next thing to think about is what equipment are you carrying on the kayak? I talked about the standard sort of safety equipment that you should carry, and in that video I said, well, I don't normally carry a PLB. Yes, I'd like to buy one, but I don't carry one on me all the time. It's exactly the same for my helmet and a spare paddle. I don't always carry a spare paddle, mostly because I forget to put it in the van. But if I'm going a long distance, then I make sure I've got a spare paddle. If I'm paddling on my own, then I tend to make sure I've got a spare paddle versus if I'm paddling with someone else. A helmet. Do you need to wear a helmet all the time? Well, some would say yes, some would say no. For me, I wear a helmet if there's a risk of me tipping out of my kayak onto rocks. So if I'm fishing in very shallow water, if I'm doing a surf launch or recovery, then I'll tend to wear my helmet. The equipment that you carry should never lower your tolerance for risk. Equipment is there to keep you safe. Your risk assessment shouldn't necessarily take into account all the equipment you're carrying. And the final thing to think about, the final thing I take into account in my risk assessment, is the experience level of the group that I'm in. I often paddle with people who are brand new on kayaks to people with years of experience. And if anyone ever says these conditions are unsafe, we stop and turn around. And that could be conditions where I'm quite comfortable, but my very experienced friend says, actually, I think I'd rather turn around. Or where it could be gorgeous, could be flat calm, but someone says, actually, I'm a bit uncomfortable, maybe it's too deep, maybe it's the first time out on the water, doesn't matter. We stop and we turn around. The experience level of the group that you're in will determine how far you go offshore, what conditions you're comfortable in, and it's really important you discuss that with the group. At the start of this video, I showed you one of my worst days out on the water, a mistake that hopefully you can learn from without having to make yourself. And in that video, the mistake we made was not just having a conversation and turning around. We should have just had a conversation, turned around and gone in. It was not safe for the conditions that we were in.
Swirling. So we'll just be sensible through here and we'll just paddle round to the front.
Like it gets us out the way the put zone.
Pardon?
Gets us out the way the put zone.
Yeah. Because you can see the water swirling, look at it. I could see it a minute ago. I thought it was wind. A bit of wind chop on the surface. But it's not.
What causes the water?
Current underneath. So there's a rock somewhere here, probably there where that flat section is. And then what's happening is the swell must be, the current that is here, that you can feel it on the boat, must be coming up and then hitting this and then bouncing off.
Nice.
So it's causing this chop. I mean, it's fine, it's not, you know, it's nothing dangerous today. But you know, if you were out here and it was a bit bumpy and there's a bit of swell, you could totally see this like getting a bit of a confluence, a bit of confused water, you know?
We all make mistakes, but hopefully this video has given you some idea of how I risk assess my paddling and some tips for you to look at the conditions that you're paddling in and determine what's safe for you. I hope you've enjoyed this video and this series. It's World Drowning Prevention Day tomorrow. This video will probably come out today or tomorrow, and it's really good that we're talking about drowning prevention and how to risk assess safely for kayaking. I hope you enjoy this video, and if you do, give it a like and subscribe. The weather's better. I've been out for about 4 or 5 days. I've got lots of paddling footage to put in, and I'm hoping to share with you some of my fishing trips that I've been on. It's a shame I've not had time to put them together, but I wanted to put this drowning prevention video together because it's something that's quite important and I hold quite closely to sort of my heart is safety. So stay safe on the kayak. Thank you very much for watching and have a good weekend.
Right, let's just paddle a bit more. So yeah, it's another big wave. Just a bit too rough. You know, I've wondered recently if I've got a bit risk adverse with the weather. And because I look at some of the conditions I've not gone out in and look at some of the conditions I've gone out in the past. Now that doesn't mean that when I was going out in the past it was right to go out. But I do definitely think I paddle on less windy conditions than I used to. I've also moved house since I used to. So the sort of areas that I fish are a little bit different now than I used to. And up the Forth is definitely less windy. There's a boat coming in behind us, so we'll just get ourselves out of the wind. It's interesting. I do wonder if I've become more risk adverse. But today, it's not one of those days. It is definitely too rough to be out fishing.